Hello, and a warm welcome to this cybersecurity webinar brought to you by Picus Security. My name is Simon Monaghan. I'm part of the product marketing team at Picus and also the host. Before I formally introduce the subject of today's webinar and the experts that will be joining me to discuss it, firstly, a little bit of housekeeping to get through. Please be aware that we're using the Goldcast platform today and we'll be recording the session from start to finish. From the side menu on the right-hand side of your screen, you can chat with your fellow attendees, submit questions to me and today's panelists, and also respond to some of the polls that we have lined up for you. Overall, we're expecting the session to last around an hour, and that time includes a lot of time at the end for Q&A. So if you do have some questions, then please feel free to submit them, and I'll put them to our experts at the end. So that's the obligatory housekeeping done. I suggest we kick off. When it comes to cybersecurity, financial firms are amongst the most resilient in the world. Yet, despite the millions of dollars invested to ensure that critical systems and data are protected against the latest threats, many security leaders face ongoing challenges to understand exactly how operationally resilient they are and identify ways to enhance it further. To join me to discuss the latest challenges that security teams in finance face, as well as strategies to help enhance operational resilience in 2023 and beyond. I'm delighted to be joined by Cihan Salioglu, Cybersecurity Advisory Lead in EMEA at Mastercard, and also Darren Humphreys, Group CISO at Acora, a managed services provider and also partner of Picus in the UK. Gentlemen, really good to see you. Why don't you both take a moment just to briefly introduce yourselves to our audience? Cihan, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, Simon. Hi, everyone. This is Cihan Salioglu. I'm a cybersecurity subject matter expert, cybersecurity advisory lead for Europe at Mastercard. And we have a strong partnership with Picus, and thanks for having me, Simon.
All right, it's an absolute pleasure. No, thanks for being here.
Hi everyone, I'm Darren Humphreys. I'm the Group CISO at Acora. We are a managed security services provider and IT provider company in mid-market and enterprise. I'm here with Simon and Cihan to talk about how we make use of Picus and our partnership in order to actually support the blue team side of operations as opposed to just red team side of operations.
Thanks a lot, gents. I'm looking forward to getting into the discussions with you today. I mentioned it at the start. Financial services firms are generally recognized as being amongst the most mature organizations in the world when it comes to cybersecurity. But the challenge of staying resilient in a vastly changing IT and threat landscape means that security leaders in finance can't afford to put their feet up, actually far from it. According to a report by the Boston Consulting Group, financial institutions are 300 times more likely to be targeted by cyber attacks than other companies. So Cihan, starting with you, I'd just be interested to get your perspective on why you think financial firms remain such a prime target in today's environment.
Sure. So let me start by talking about the motives of cyber criminals, because when we categorize the cyber threat actors, we categorize them based on first the skill set, how sophisticated, how capable they are, and then the motivations. Most typical motivations of hackers are financial gain, and in financial services industry, you can see why cyber criminals are targeting financial institutions, because that's where the money is, right? The second driver of cyber criminals is the reputation. they want to make a name for themselves. And financial institutions are one of the most most popular organizations where they can make a name for themselves, because in the cybercrime world it's very similar to what we as non-criminal people are doing, right? We have our own projects, we have our engagements, and we prepare and we set the scope and we set the purpose of the engagement at the beginning, right? And then what we do is we start recruiting the right people for the project. We set up the team and then we start working on it, right? And when it's ready, we roll it out. In the cybercrime world, they really working in a similar manner. They set up their campaigns, they set up the targets and the scope, and then they start recruiting people for the campaign. They make their preparations and then they launch the attack. So in the cybercrime world, it's really important to have a name for you in that arena. And in order to make that name, you need to go out there and do something. That's actually how you can put your name out there. So reputation is another key driver for cyber criminals, and financial institutions are very well for that. Disruption is another motive. In some of the categories of cyber threat actors, we see that these organizations just want to make some noise in some cases, or disrupt the day-to-day life of individuals or civilians, or in people living in a specific region. We have seen this in the cyber war, during the cyber war in Europe in the last 2 years, actually. And disruption is another key driver for cyber criminals. And when they attack financial institutions, they can really disrupt, make a huge impact in the people's day-to-day lives. That's why financial institutions are very attractive. And another driver of cyber criminals is the information. They just want to get a better knowledge or gain unauthorized access to some of the confidential documents sometimes, or just want to get some more information, maybe just to prepare their next phase of attacks. So all these four drivers, financial gain, targeting financial institutions is very lucrative. Reputation, they can get a good name for themselves. Disruption, it can be very disruptive. We knew this already, but during COVID time, especially during COVID, we saw that critical infrastructure, financial services are really critical infrastructure today. At least should be regarded as critical infrastructure, and the information. So because of all these reasons, financial institutions are prime targets for cyber criminals.
Jihan, thank you. I think that was a great overview. Darren, so Jihan was just describing some of the drivers, the motivations for cyber criminals to target financial institutions. How does this translate to security teams? What are some of the factors that make the job of cybersecurity in finance particularly challenging, given sort of the threats that security teams face in this area?
I think finance, as well as other industries, are suffering from talent and skills shortages. And even if we do find talented individuals, part of the issue is that the constant learning curve that needs to be done is not industrialized as well as it is in the hacking community. There are very well published documents to show that the red team collaboration and inter-business collaboration, it sounds, to Jihan's point, it sounds really romanticized in cybersecurity when we see hackers are set up with call center functionality, first, second, third line operational setup, but they are. This is a very lucrative business. And as a result of this, we are constantly on the back foot from a blue team perspective. We're a standing target I guess if you want to talk it as a military doctrine, people know where we are and they know what the front door looks like. They possibly even know what the back doors look like better than ourselves, actually. And, as a standing target, they have every opportunity in the world to constantly try our defenses and try and find a way in. And I think the biggest challenge we've got is the skills, talent, and really what I call the industrialization of how does the blue team get better at doing what it is they're doing.
Jihan, how does the size of the task defending organizations within the financial services sector compare to other industries? Is it definitely a difficult job, definitely more of a harder job?
Well, I will give you an example from the evolution of the payments industry, actually. So when we look at the payments industry, in the past, it was very limited. The interfaces or attack surfaces were very limited, right? Because you need to be on site with your card physically in order to make the transaction. And then we had the opportunity to make all these transactions virtually with card not present for transactions. And now today, we have, when you look at the payment ecosystem, for instance, we have the issuers, acquirers, processors. In addition to that, we also have IoT devices that can complete these payment transactions. So it's a very, very complex environment, first of all. So the workload in the financial services industry is huge because of the complexity to begin with. Other than that, but when we look at the spender of cybersecurity, we see that public institutions, public industry is the biggest spender in cybersecurity, right? But after that, what I have seen is financial institutions are, together with maybe telecom industry, are the biggest spenders. But in terms of the workload of managing cybersecurity risks in an organization, it should be top down. So when we're talking about the effort to protect your organization, protect the organizations in financial services industry, it's not all about the work of the technical teams or information security teams or security governance teams. It's actually a full-blown business starting from the top. And today, when you look at the amount of time and effort financial institutions spend on cybersecurity, is coming from the top management all the way into the down. And of course, the cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. It's a cliche that we hear a lot in the WMS trainings, but it is correct. So when you include all those hours invested in cybersecurity, you can see that it's a huge investment for any organization, whether it's a 10 employee fintech or it's a huge bank. It's always bigger. It's always larger in the financial services industry.
Darren, would you agree with that point, presumably about cybersecurity being a shared responsibility? And clearly security teams have a big part to play in that, but the responsibilities are spread out, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a big problem. I mean, it's everybody's responsibility, down to anybody who opens an email or browses a website or shares a file. But it's fundamentally an IT problem. We deploy IT in order to fulfill a business purpose. We don't use chalkboards to run our workloads and produce features and functions, and in this case transact money. So we use IT in order to do that, and IT has a set of inherent weaknesses, and security are there to support the other staff members across the IT functions in order to do that. It's not just a separate area where security do this alone. So whilst large financial institutes have a lot more deployments, possibly a lot more technical debt as well, they also do have a lot more team members in IT, and therefore, on ratio, a lot more team members in security. And as a result of that, it's about organization, education, and things like that as well, because the more people involved in something, the more complex the problem and the idea around it is. And financial has a massive problem because their attack surface and supplier networks and everything is just so much vaster today in a connected world than it ever has been.
I think you gentlemen have touched on some important points so far around sort of some of the challenges, the skills gaps, the complex the complex IT infrastructures, sort of managing IoT devices and balancing security between the cloud and those legacy systems. I want to move on and talk a little bit about the changing threat landscape now and the impact that has on security teams in finance. Just before we go into that discussion, I just wanted to bring up some recent research from Picus in this area. Every year, Picus publishes what we call the Red Report, an analysis of attack techniques leveraged by adversaries. This year's report, you can see a summary on screen now, analysed over 500,000 malware samples, and the team analysed those samples and mapped the behaviours that they exhibited to the MITRE attack framework. You can see some of the findings from this year's report on screen now. And whilst I don't want to go into these in too much detail, in fact, if you'd like to read more about some of these findings, then there's a copy of the report in the media tab of the Goldcast platform for you to freely download and read in your leisure time. But I think essentially to kind of summarize some of the key takeaways from this year's report really is they emphasize the extent to which attack behaviors are evolving. The techniques adversaries using are becoming more sophisticated and evasive. The average piece of malware now is capable of performing over 20 techniques and procedures. So it's a very sort of multi-purpose. The malware is not just designed to infiltrate networks, but it's designed to improve success when it's in the network by exhibiting techniques that can leverage lateral movement to help attackers achieve their objectives. Darren, a question to you. What, in your opinion, are the threats that security leaders in finance are most concerned about?
I mean, it's from an attack surface perspective, it's the same things. You know, people are going to exploit a vulnerability on the internet to get in. They're going to send phishing emails. They're going to go through the soft underbelly through the supply chain at the moment. What I found most interesting from the research data in the Red Report was the fact that most of the TTPs are what I would call live off the land techniques that are being used. If you look at where they are from a kill chain perspective, simplifies version of the attack, but they're already in your systems by the time they're using these command interpreters. They're already in the system by the time they're dumping credentials and moving laterally. So what's really interesting effectively is you know, where are we on our defense in depth perspective? You know, in order for a phishing email to actually get to a position where a human being's involved from a red team perspective, if we just list them off very quickly, you're typically going to go through some sort of email spam filtering, phishing email gateway. You're then going to go into the Exchange server and it's going to be sent, it's going to go through that, which has anti-malware, anti-URL features in it as well. You're then going to get to the human firewall at this point. If it's an attachment, it may or may not execute within your EDR or AV, but you're on your 4th level of control, and we'll just assume within that 4 level, you've got 4.1 and 4.2. A user's then going to go and click on a phishing a link. The link may or may not be stopped by the proxy server, and the link may be malware related, dropper related, or it could be credential theft related. But you're on your 5th level of defense in depth by the time it goes anywhere near a SOC, which is a security monitoring team who need to triage all of these indicators and do something with it. So, you know, in DevSecOps terminology, we always call it shift left, move the problem as left as possible to the root of the problem. We're kind of in the middle of the attack. If you take the attack or the kill chain and you condense it from left to right, all of the main TTPs that are being executed by the top pieces of malware, they're inside of the environment. They're not external to the environment anymore. They're inside the environment. And that's a big problem because the earlier you can stop it on the kill chain, the less triage, containment, less time you've got to clean up the incident, the less it impacts the users by having to remove mass amounts of emails or blocking things. And we seem to be fighting the problem on the defensive and response side of things, unless we get really good at attack surface management. So we are too far in, as far as I'm concerned, in the kill chain or in the attack chain. and it's becoming a detection and response problem as opposed to a protection problem. The tools are not protecting us because we're that far in.
I think some really interesting points there. Jihan, what's your perspective? Would you like to comment on some of that?
Yeah, I totally agree with Darren. I mean, the security leaders are mostly concerned about identifying all these threats before they go any further. Before they progress inside the organization. So it is very important to keep an eye out. And another point, maybe as an addition to what Darren just explained, security leaders are very keen in looking at the cyber threat landscape or valid cyber threat landscape for their organizations, because it's not actually any different than protecting your like village or your town in the medieval times, right? Because you need to look outside the wall to see what is waiting to attack you. Is it an army of 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100 people? Do they have cavalry, archers, or what kind of artillery they have? So it's really important to keep an eye out to understand which defenses you need to invest in the most in order to use your existing energy in the wisest way possible. And today is actually even worse because those interfaces that I just explained to you, those walls are everywhere, because the interface or the attack surface are actually everywhere. Let's take an organization, for instance. You have the bank or you have the headquarters, but people are working remotely. All these endpoints are attack surfaces. So it is very important to keep an eye out to understand the changing cyber threat landscape for that industry, for that region, and build your defenses accordingly and adjust them when needed.
And Gian, you raise an interesting point by using the analogy of the medieval. You can poison somebody's water supply and kill off populations and go and take over. You need to trade within a medieval village. So you have people who bring goods into the city and they have a marketplace. So you've got people who will infiltrate and become insider threats and all sorts of things because they're inside the perimeter now. I mean, deperimeterized networking was a 2012 analogy, but yet I'm still seeing people trying to build defenses where we're letting people in, and that's the craziest thing. We need to rethink how we do things, and every endpoint and has a problem on the attack scale, but you can't spend money everywhere. So not only have you got to redistribute the energy, as Jihan said, in this case it's our cybersecurity people and our resources and what they're going to do to fix the problem, and then retrospective analysis and lessons learned. But there's a lot to go into this from a preparation side of things as well, which is, if you can know and reduce your attack surface as much as possible down to your crown jewels. Unfortunately, I'm going to give a medieval analogy on this as well. I'm sure if somebody was going to infiltrate a 3-tier castle, and there's three walls within a castle, I'm sure the king or queen are going to run to the strongest stronghold, crown jewels, and then unfortunately the rest of the population just has to suffer, right? So what I mean by that is if your endpoints have to suffer malware, but you're protecting your crown jewels, your business can still succeed. And yes, you're putting a lot of people out, and it's a big problem because longer term, you'll have workforce issues and people who are able to grow the business and things like that. But you have to sacrifice parts of the business and the functionalities of the business to protect the wider part of the business.
You mentioned, Darren, you can't spend anywhere, so security leaders have to prioritize, right? And I think security leaders in finance, they're often looked up to because they have more resources at their disposal. They perhaps have more controls, larger budgets, bigger teams. But it doesn't make the challenge any easier, does it?
I think it's comparable. It's ratios, right? I mean, whilst finance do have a lot more money, they also have a lot more IT assets. So if you look at ratio of workloads of servers and endpoints versus how many people work in IT versus how many people work in security, and the per dollar value in security, I do think it's probably in line with everybody else's market spending and ratio as well. It's just a bigger and more complex and compounded problem in financial because of how how many people are involved and how many assets are involved.
Do you think that finance or security teams in finance are well placed to defend against the threats that they face?
I think the well practiced is they are very much practiced. They go through this is live fire exercises or live action exercises a lot. I would say due to normal sort of staff attrition. Finance, actually, I did some research this morning. Financial staff attrition for people who work for financial companies is actually better than anywhere else in the industries. A lot of people do have shifts and movements for their IT career growth, but finance seems to be top, probably again for that stigma of people are highly involved in what's going on and things like that. However, on the negative side of things, I do think the executive attrition in finance looks worse than what it does at the shop floor level. So people who actually do a lot of work, SOC teams and vulnerability management team, they seem to last quite a long time, more than the typical 2.5 years to 4 years that you normally see in other organizations. But the exec level actually, or mid-management exec level, shifts quite a lot in finance.
At Picus, we talk a lot to leaders within the security space, and not just within finance, but one of the things that we hear a lot is that teams have invested in controls and processes, but they still struggle to really measure how operationally effective the controls that they have in place are. Jihan, in what ways does an inability to kind of measure readiness and risk impact affect security leaders in their teams?
A lot. I mean, as a leader of person who is in charge of cybersecurity, you need to really understand what your weaknesses and strengths are. And so at the end of the day, in order to, as I said at the beginning, it's really important to use your energy and resources in the most efficient way possible, right? In order to survive. There are many reasons for that. There's no organization without unlimited budgets, or there's a skills shortage issue and retention issue in cybersecurity. So you really need to pick your battles and pick them wisely in order to get the most benefit for your organization, in order to make the most out of it. In order to be able to do that, you need to prioritize risks, prioritize projects, prioritize the effort of your organization. So if a security leader is not aware of where the most crown jewels are, what can be sacrificed or not, and if that person doesn't know the strengths of the organization, then really you cannot make an informed decision to manage the cybersecurity risks, and the impact can be huge. So it's really important to really understand where the focus needs to be. Of course, there are a lot of, when you look at the cybersecurity risk assessment reports, there are a lot of gaps. You can always find a new project to invest in. In worst case scenario, you can upgrade something, you can expand team, do some improvements, but you really need to know where your focus and attention should be, where your priorities should be. And now there's a new regulation coming in. I mean, it's already enacted, but it's going to enter into force at the beginning of 2025. DORA regulation in Europe. It is also talking about in the first pillar of the act, of the regulation. It is pointing out the importance of making a business impact assessment. So that's only when you can understand where your priorities should be, who the queen of the castle is. In order to find that, you need to make that assessment at the beginning. So it's basically that.
Darren, as a CISO yourself, I guess you'll know about a lot of the pressures as much as anybody about the pressure that CISOs are under to demonstrate security to the business, to help the business understand the security risk. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that and your experiences and how how much of an issue this is?
So from a non-puristic perspective, it's about an acceptable level of risk, which is a business problem and not a cybersecurity problem. You know, you can read lots of textbooks or you can read a lot of reports about the problems, but it is about where you fix the problems and how much time and effort you put into them. So portfolio management of your security controls and spend is really, really important, especially, you know, in a economic downturn. You know, CIOs are being asked to do more with less, and that pressures all the way down through the C-suite. So it's around the justification. Now, measurement is a huge part of that, and I do think boards are sick of being measured and being sold to by internal teams and external suppliers through fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's not about that anymore. Everybody's outgrown that phase of going, you should have this and you should have that. You know, our metrics shows that, you know, like I illustrated earlier, you know, we're down to our 6th place on our kill chain for a phishing email to get through and somebody to steal and do a business email compromise. So realistically, how can I represent that back to the board when we've made all of these investments and it's just fundamentally failing? And you can't use terms in absolutes. You have to talk to them about an acceptable level of risk. And it does require proper risk management. I don't know at what point, because I'm a very old hat at this, people stopped doing risk management and decided just to go tick box exercises with the way that they purchase and hire things. Don't get us wrong, there is a standard shopping list of security controls that you need to have. But I would say anybody who's doing a security program, you know, post 12 months, 18 months of deployment, you should be then analyzing and assessing whether your security investments are outgrown, whether they're integrated properly, whether they're working together properly, because disparate security controls add complexity between security teams. Not having the right orchestration automation platforms to do your discovery, triage, remediation, or anything like that from a reactionary perspective is a problem. We can illustrate quite well that protective controls, you know, they do have a place and they do stop a lot of commodity problems. But unfortunately, you have to expect that the controls will fail, which is why we have a defense in depth perspective. I think to summarize, I'd rather have more controls in my portfolio that work together at a bronze or a core level than have 2 or 3 security controls which are advanced silver bullets, because it's about portfolio management and acceptable risk.
At Picus, we're a firm believer in automated validation and the benefits that has in helping security leaders to measure their security effectiveness and better translate risk to the business. Many organizations in the financial industry at the moment are conducting penetration testing on a regular basis. They're conducting red teaming exercises, which are more objective based. And they're designed to, identify vulnerabilities and gaps in the way that some of their controls are configured. But really, speaking to security leaders, many struggle to get the maximum value from those assessments. They're a lot of the time manual. The results are quickly outdated. As we discussed, the landscape changes very quickly, so the results of a pen test can change overnight. Jihan, I'd like to get into this debate a little bit around sort of manual and automated testing. In your view, how regularly do security leaders in finance need to test the efficacy of their controls and processes?
I have been working, before joining Mastercard, for 13 years, I worked for Big Four consulting companies doing cybersecurity assessments. And at the beginning of this assessments, not the assessments, but in actual proper audits, at the beginning of the audit, we create an audit charter. And in that audit charter, we explain everything, the scope, the purpose, and then the sampling methodology is very important. And the way we do this sampling methodology is based on the importance of the controls. So while testing the effectiveness of in the audit, we have two layers of assessments. First, the design effectiveness assessment. We look at the processes and documentation necessary to manage the risk in the most appropriate way. And in the second phase of the assessment, we are looking at the effectiveness of the controls effectiveness tests. And while doing that, we need this sampling methodology because we cannot look at everything. While sampling these methodologies, we pick the ones that are the most important, and we get the most samples from these controls. All organizations need to have that. They need to know which controls are the most, security controls are the most. Usually the perimeter security are usually very critical because it's the outermost layer of an organization, like an onion or like a castle. So usually that, since you gave the example of penetration testing, external facing systems are very, very important. That's why they are usually prioritized, and we need a lot of eyes and ears around these high walls there. So in terms of effectiveness testing or continuous or automated effectiveness testing, when you look at the perimeter security controls, there are a lot of tools that monitors the health of these tools, right? So if a server goes down, there are monitoring tools that tells you, hey, the server is down, it's not responding by pings. If a firewall goes down, you get notified immediately, but you cannot really test unless you have a technology for that, the effectiveness of the controls that you have designed at the beginning. Because, and it's very sad, I have seen a lot of big companies who have invested a lot in cybersecurity. They got the cutting edge technology, they have the teams, they have the technology and everything. But a junior employee comes in and makes a human error. And it might be very hard to detect that kind of stuff. There are a lot of tools that scans the external systems to see if there are any forgotten servers that was set up for POC purposes, etc. So that kind of stuff is very important. So especially in the most critical controls, the validation of the effectiveness should be continuous. In today's world, this is possible, and all organizations should use that, I think.
Darren, what's your perspective on how automated, or the benefits of automated and manual approaches?
So manual approaches is typically time bound unless you've got unlimited funding. I think fundamentally, to answer your first question of how often should you be doing the type of testing, it's continuous. And then secondly, do we need a human being involved? I look at this as almost, again, a first, second, third line. If my first line person can do everything en masse and you pass the first stage gate, it'll go to a second line. So if I only have the budget to perform 10 penetration tests a year, and these are done to, I'm paying for, third line, gold standard, really expert level things, but yet the findings are almost at the junior tier level, then I've just spent too much money on a gold tier person doing a bronze tier job. So would I rather have 100 bronze tier tests and graduate from that rather than 10 gold tests? Yes, I would. So again, XY scale, I'd rather go horizontally and have everything covered first and consecutively. Now, and then you would go up into doing more sophisticated and gold level testing where they're done by more advanced techniques or more advanced people. And the reason is because I want my horizontal threat landscape coverage first. So the Verus report from Verizon has stated since 2008, 96% of most breaches occurred with a low level of sophistication.
Yeah.
So in that regard, again, I have the budget to do something. Do I want this many tests or this many tests? And the answer is, if people want to have the debate between human testing versus automated testing and which one's better, I think they're fundamentally looking at it the wrong way. Again, if I can breach something in 10 seconds, I don't need a human being to do it when there's a tool that can do it for me. if I need to add human validation on top of certain things because there's some logic exploits or something very complicated in code and I need to do some reverse engineering and things like that, great, you get into that. But the overall attack surface reduction needs to be done first before you go anywhere near the gold-plated testing.
Jihan, how much frustrating would it be as a CISO in finance to commission a 30-day red teaming assessment and the red team to find a real basic vulnerability in like the first day or two that's led them to achieve their objective? You know, you would be really frustrated with that. You'd want a red team really to go in and discover more of those complex, harder to discover vulnerabilities in pursuit of their objectives. So yeah, I just thought, is that an experience that you've heard from CISOs in the past?
Actually, yeah. I mean, usually when I speak with CISOs, it doesn't matter how big of a budget they have. They are always talking and complaining about the size of their team. I haven't seen any organization that is not running understaffed or doesn't get attention from the consulting firm they're working with. So they're always complaining about that kind of stuff, and it's really very fundamental thing to automate whatever thing is possible. So you should be automating everything you can, where you can. It doesn't matter. It's not only in cybersecurity; it's everywhere. But it's especially important in cybersecurity. So usually that's the case. I have seen when I interact with the CISOs, they're always talking about that.
Over the course of our discussion so far today, we've touched upon a lot of key points. I think one of the things you were talking about earlier is the need to discover the attack surface, to really need to understand what you have in place so you're in a better position to make decisions to protect it. We've spoken a little bit about vulnerability management and the need to validate. So these three components. What we're hearing more in the industry and from people like Gartner, they're talking about threat exposure management and the need to adopt more of a unified approach to your assessment program and really use insights from these three key areas to make more data-driven decisions. Vulnerability management in isolation, for instance, can't help you really prioritize which vulnerabilities to patch. But when you layer on top of that insights from validation, you know what controls you have in place and whether those controls are preventing vulnerability exploitation. Again, these types of insights are helping you to prioritize where to spend your time and effort. Jihan, maybe you could just talk us through this approach to exposure management they're hearing about more and how it benefits security leaders.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes the things can go out of control. Especially, this is very possible in the larger organizations. In large organizations, there are a lot of technical initiatives, IT projects, or I mean, anything is almost tied back to IT because there's a new application being onboarded from marketing team, for instance, and there are a lot of shadow IT projects. There might be a lot of shadow IT projects. So, and you implement controls, you create awareness, etc. But still, we have seen that kind of things happening on the field. So that's why actually it's very important to manage the exposed risks. And it's not only about the interfaces, the connections you have with the third parties. It's also about the people you're working with and the business processes you have. Because in some cases, data might be leaking through one of the projects you're working with an external party. So it's not only about the interfaces, the connections, network at the network layer, even at the presentation layer, there might be some information leaking your organization, or there might be some loopholes that you're not even aware of. So that kind of exposure management should be actually conducted at a 360 angle, so that just to make sure that there's nothing leaving the organization unnoticed. There's no gaps that unauthorized intruders are taking advantage of.
Darren, anything you like to comment about exposure management based on your experience?
I think from a technical sense, we've been trying to get better at exposure management for some time. You know, CVSS version 3 had temporal scoring, where it would do things like tell you whether you would need to have a privilege to make use of an exploitation, or you would be network adjacent. So to, you know, Jihan's point, you tend to look at things from an attack surface perspective. You tend to look at what are the particular vulnerabilities versus the exposure. And I see with a lot of my junior teams, especially my customer base, you know, they're just following the advice blindly from vulnerability management tools, and it's getting no better. There's only a certain amount of time you can reboot systems and machines and patch and that things anyway before you start impacting a business. So you need to really look at vulnerabilities in the right way. I think as a CISO, you know, every one of these tools provide a data point. Every tool you buy in your portfolio and department that you have a functionality from, like a vulnerability person or a GRC person, there's just massive amount of data and problems that you can deal with. And ultimately speaking, I don't think compliance really helps either. It tells you you must do, you know, hundreds of things. Really, I just want 10 things a month that I can get better at. I want the 10 critical few that I can get better at. And this is what Gartner are trying to do with regards to their exposure management. It still does require a risk assessment, because it's not just about the tool, it's about the attack path and things like that as well. We did a very recent assessment in a Fortune 100 company, and we identified 69,000 attack paths to crown jewels. We have 4 capture the flags that we need to do. And what was interesting is the number 69,000 means absolutely nothing. We just know, sorry, 69 million, I should say.
Million. Oh, wow.
It means absolutely nothing. But then we reduced it to 17,000, which again, there's still 17,000 residual risks after the fact, but the order of magnitude difference is massive. And we were able to measure that. And it was quite interesting, because we did have some people on the board who just wanted to pick out the numbers. Why is it 69 million? What does 17,000 residual still mean? And you just give them a percentage. It is this much percentage better than it was before for this much investment. So basically, you know, we have reduced the problem to what we believe is an acceptable level of risk that we can mathematically show. Now, we can argue about 6s and 7s all day long and have that view. Realistically, I go back to the simple analogy. I want 10 things a month that I can prioritize and fix. And I'd love it if the tools and the decision making was actually driven by that, because we are in, you know, data management decision making. But what about information management decision making? Lots of data points are just data points. We need better information. And what Gartner are trying to do is really, Corbett did this a long time ago in IT, and they called it value chains, where you take 2 pieces of data and you fuse them together to get a force multiplier. Security are just playing catch up on these things. I don't know why, because, you know, we're supposed to be faster paced, but effectively that's what we're doing. We're now moving into, is it just about vulnerabilities? Is it just about compliance? And I think the entire market over the next 5 years will change into, what does your exposure management look like? And there'll be a new field specifically around these data-driven decision making, purely around exposure management.
I think we could talk on this topic for a long, long time. I think, in fact, it could be the subject of a whole webinar in itself. I'm conscious of the fact that there's just over 10 minutes remaining. So I'd just like to invite the audience to submit any sort of Q&A questions that they'd like to put to Jihan and Darren. While we give you time to do that, I just wanted to take the opportunity just to talk about supply chain risk. The MoveIt IT hack is obviously very topical at the moment, and we know that a lot of well-known organizations have been caught out. Just before we go into the QA, just wondered if either of you had any advice on what organizations in finance can do to kind of mitigate some of the risks in this particular area, because yeah, we know that financial firms have large supply chains. So yeah, any advice that you could offer here?
I think documenting your shadow IT and your business processes, which should have been risk assessed, would have stopped a lot of the problem. So fundamentally, the ABCs before we even get into a defense in depth, in a lot of cases, were not followed. you should know your business process, and in a lot of cases, you are either recipient of or the instantiation of a move it process. So there, yes, the vulnerability came out. There was a patch almost instantly on it as well. I don't understand how people were hit so fast, and I can only imagine it was based on a shadow ID problem, being that they don't understand where the deployment was within their environment or their dependency upon it.
Jihan, anything to add?
No, that is actually so true. I was also surprised to see many companies being affected by that. So it's really, as Darren emphasized, it's really important to document everything you have in terms of the business processes, third-party connections you have, whatever is exposed to external facing systems, whatever is exposed to internet. So then you should go back and check everything and validate. That's the only way, and it seems to be simple. I mean, it's easier to do than speak, but yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely easier said than done. I mean, supply chain's hard because you can only contract manage really your supply chain if it is a problem in them areas, and if they were unable to catch up to it. Realistically, for the financial industries who do have a lot of pull on their suppliers, because they're typically the biggest people on the block, right? So they're bigger than the other downstream suppliers of them. There should be quite a lot of pull and lessons learned that they can do against suppliers in this space to say, why didn't you patch or remediate this in time? And our typical supply chain contract should have things like critical patches deployed within the first 7 days. They should be keeping up with our normal, 14 days if you're cyber essentials, 30 days if you're PCI and things like that. So realistically, the exposure shouldn't have been that big. More importantly, and I guess this is the interesting part, is if this is a business to business or a business to consumer, in most cases it is business to business, why was any access allowed to it in the first place? So we would have an any to an IP address set up where Move It was allowed to be used between the business to business. It's not a business to consumer application. So again, it's an attack surface problem. And if you were doing regular attack surface reduction, you would find that your Move It was open to anybody on the internet, and it shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
Exactly, and on while managing third parties, again, it needs to be prioritized and categorized, because you may have maybe thousands of. I've seen e-commerce sites that literally has thousands of third parties they are working with, web services, APIs. There are a lot of stuff going back and forth, but they need to prioritize the third parties they're working with. Some of them, with some of them, you may have a stronger connection, and a lot of the data exchange might be occurring. So with some of them, it might be less. So especially in that kind of situation, you need to segregate. You need to design separate onboarding and monitoring processes for each of them. You need to pay attention more to the critical suppliers you're working with, and of course, even if they are not critical, even the smallest ones should have a proper onboarding process and monitoring process.
It's an energy thing again, right, Jihan? So
Exactly.
You should rank your suppliers. You'll have suppliers that affect your crown jewels. You'll have suppliers that don't. If you know your suppliers that don't, there might be a residual risk of data leakage. But again, if you know what your crown jewels data is, you probably find that it's not critical data either. So just because a hacker, and there's a lot of this in the industry right now, hackers are overemphasizing they've got your data. In a lot of cases, they've got practically nothing that's not already in the public domain, but everybody's scrutinizing it in a way. And, being data breached these days is like a Tuesday afternoon. It's happened to everybody. So realistically, unless it's critical data or financial data or something super impacting people's lives, I think the consumer realizes that cyber have a big challenge in this area, and it happens everywhere.
Absolutely. Let's take a few questions from our audience. We've got one from Fari, quite a long question. What emerging technologies and strategies do you anticipate will play a vital role in enhancing cybersecurity within the financial services sector over the next 5 years? And how will this address the evolving threats and vulnerabilities specific to the industry? So quite a big one. We've probably covered a little bit of this throughout the session. Dara and Jihan, would you either of you like to tackle this one?
So from my perspective, I would say it would be exposure management. It would be SOAR, so it is security orchestration and automation. So you can actually do things faster and more automated or orchestrated, where human beings have pre-set up runbooks and activities and firewall change requests that do all sorts of things that look at vulnerabilities. And then SASE, which is not new, but I can see it actually being adopted a lot more. So SASE to me is, again, a new buzzword from about 2018. But it emphasizes two things: posture management, which we had for a very, very long time on VPNs and device control and MDM. But it also helps with regards to that deperimeterized networking and environments that Jihan and I were talking about. There's no such thing as a stationary castle with a wall around it anymore. There are too many holes within the supply chain, and intruders come in within your castle that you need to look at the problem slightly differently. So they're the three I would pick out.
Jihan, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll give you an example from a study that we conduct as Mastercard on a regular basis. Every year in certain countries, we conduct a survey and ask people where their cybersecurity investment is going this year. What is the hottest topic in your agenda for cybersecurity this year? And we started doing that back in 2020, and it was the COVID year, and we saw that a lot of investments were going to the technologies that enables or expands the remote access capabilities. So a lot of investment were going to either upgrading their firewalls or adding new remote working capabilities, etc. And the following, and by the way, before that, it was mostly around data protection. DLP was at rise, or like privileged access management was one of them. But during COVID, it was different. They were investing heavily in the infrastructure. After that, things became normal. We saw that identity and access management was one of the hot topics in financial services industry. And then last year, according to our study, we saw that SOAR was the hottest topic in the agenda of the financial institutions. And for the next 5 years, so I explained you this because we don't know what kind of a disruptive thing is ahead of us in the next 5 years. If it's going to be something like a pandemic, or I don't know, the world is going crazy now. There might be a lot of disasters in the next 5 years. So depending on the drivers, depending on the regulations, because regulation is one of the key drivers of cybersecurity investments. But overall, to give you just one answer, the technologies that can leverage AI can be at the rise for the next 5 years, because by using AI both on the attacking side and the defense side, because it's very important, because while attacking, if you're leveraging AI, what you can do is not only mimicking the capabilities or the behavior of a real life hacker. It's actually more than that. By using AI, you are going beyond the capabilities of a typical hacker, or a typical hacker can do, right? So leveraging AI is going to be key in the next 5 years, in my opinion. But we'll just wait and see.
I think we've got time for one more question. We've had a few on the subject of DORA, which is something that you mentioned earlier, Jihan.
Yeah.
What impact is that going to have across the financial industry?
In Europe, this is a regulation. DORA, by the way, first of all, DORA stands for Digital Operational Resiliency Act, and it is enacted at the beginning of the year, and it's going to enter into force the beginning of 2025. So there's a grace period so that financial institutions in scope can make their preparations and adjust their controls to comply with the requirements of this new regulation. And the companies who are in the industries who are in the scope of this regulation is not only banks. It's actually more than that. Asset management companies, insurance companies. There's a lot of companies that are going to be in the scope of this. And the focus of this regulation is understanding the critical processes of an organization and making sure that they are continuous and the organization is prepared to respond to incidents in order to ensure the continuity of operations in the cyberspace. So that's the essence of the regulation.
Thank you. Well, sadly, I think that is all we do have time for during today's session. Jihan, Darren, I want to thank you very much for joining me for what I think has been a really great discussion. I think there's been some really interesting points raised, and I hope our audience have enjoyed it. If anybody does have any questions that they'd like to pose to either Darren or Jihan, then please feel free to continue to submit them, and we will follow up with you after the session. At Picus, we help organizations to simulate real-world cyber attacks, to validate security effectiveness. If you'd like to know any more about our platform and how it can help you to minimize threat exposure, then do please feel free to reach out to us and request a demo via picussecurity.com. Thank you very much again, and we hope to see you all soon. And yeah, cheers, Darren and Jihan.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much.